Believers are always and inexorably the victims of their beliefs. I don't ask you to have sympathy for them. Neo-Nazis are the hardest people to sympathize with in the world. I just say to you straight, they are, like all of us, the victims of their beliefs. And of course, the sad fact is, they fasten on to these beliefs because they make them feel powerful, important, special. And with time, it is those beliefs that start to fasten their grip upon the believers. This young man, some of you have met him. Some of you met him 8 years ago at the Woodstock Fruit Festival. Durian Rider met him. Freelee met him. Some of you will remember his YouTube channel, Simply Vegan. He became a neo-Nazi. Note the difference in style of dress. This was his earlier period of being a suit and tie wearing devotee of Julius Evola, already 4 years ago now. And then, there's another change in fashion. He's become a green camouflage wearing, Bible invoking, self-styled redneck. But on some level, we still know, no matter how much he may engage in cosplay to try to imitate other members of his chosen ideology, he still is the same man who went to do woofing in Hawaii and attended the Woodstock Fruit Festival. He's still the same university-educated guy who chose to dissimulate this phony redneck right-wing aesthetic in the same way that he dissimulated the genteel appearance of a traditional Italian fascist before. In the next few minutes of this video, I'm going to ask you some tough questions about Freelee the Banana Girl and her role in all this. But she knew this kid. She knew Jamie Liardi. Have you ever seen a YouTube video in which Freelee was reaching out to this kid? Can you remember a YouTube video in which she was reaching out to anyone like this? Because you all know he wasn't the only one. As you're about to hear in just a few minutes, there are reasons why it's so common. Whether the reasons for it are considered shallow or profound, he's not the only example of someone for whom veganism was a gateway drug to the alt-right, and the alt-right was a gateway drug to outright neo-Nazism and fascism. There are reasons for that. Let's treat as shallow what is shallow, and let's take seriously, let's address with all due profundity the aspects of this problem that are profound. There has never been any reason to think that Freelee is left-wing. The fact that she's the type of person who can convince herself that, like, shampoo is a government conspiracy, or that toothpaste is a government conspiracy, or that everything that's taught in, the colleges of dietetics and nutrition are the product of a government conspiracy, that kind of conspiratorial thinking is, kind of inevitably, electably, inherently right-wing. It tends to draw people over to the far right, not to the far left. And people who are now shocked and horrified by hearing Freelee talk against Black Lives Matter in this way, can you remember any kind of contrast from her political past? Can you remember her expressing sympathy for Australia's Indigenous people in Canada, the United States? Can you remember her expressing any interest in, say, the politics of Africa? Can you remember, during her years of living in Thailand, part-time, if not full-time, she was in Thailand for many months of the year, all the time, can you remember her ever expressing any interest in the plight of the poor and the downtrodden, let alone ethnic minorities, migrants, refugees? There were really many opportunities for Freelee to take some kind of moral or ethical stand on many, many different humanitarian and left-wing issues, and she never once has dipped a toe into any of those places. So yes, there always were grounds to suspect that she was a bit more right-wing than people presumed her to be, simply because she was vegan and propounded a vegan diet book.
I'm going to start this video off with a quote. Henry Ford once said, "It is well enough that the people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system. For if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning."
This just means less freedom for us. You gotta get this through your head. They're taking away our freedom. They're dividing us through this mainstream narrative, and then they're conquering us. And who are they? That's what I want you to research and educate yourself. Who's behind the curtain with these big banks? Who's behind the curtain with these big banks? The elite minority. Look into the families behind this. Look into the history.
Have you ever had the feeling that everything you thought you knew is a lie? Everything from history, science, government, banking, money, law, economics, farming, energy production, water treatment, healthcare, even spirituality.
And who are they? Who's behind the curtain with these big banks? The elite minority. Look into the families behind this. Look into the history.
Beneficial information in all these areas has been suppressed and revised in order to keep us enslaved and dependent upon a corrupt debt-based system we can never pay off.
The brainwashing that you are suffering from now, this media propaganda, it's just taking over everybody's psyche, basically. And this is exactly what the system wants. This is exactly what they want. And who are they? Who's behind the curtain with these big banks?
The Federal Reserve was originally drafted as the Aldrich Bill, but when it came into Congress, they recognized Senator Aldrich's name and smelt a rat. The bankers needed better cover. They decided to send two millionaire friends to carry the bill to quell the suspicions of Congress and renamed it the Federal Reserve Act. Next, in a textbook lesson of deceit, the bankers set out to fool the American people through disinformation. In the newspapers of the day, the bankers screamed and protested against the new Federal Reserve Bill. It would ruin the banks, they exclaimed. The average person read the protesting articles of the bankers and thought to themselves, if the bankers hate it, it must be good. And then they ended up unknowingly supporting a Trojan horse. And with that, a small group had complete monopoly over the issuing and creation of American money. The central banking model from the Bank of England and the United States has now been put in all countries, and even consolidated power in parts of Europe as the European Central Bank, or ECB. This unites separate countries under one economic policy. The only places in the world that don't have central banks are North Korea, Iran, and Cuba. In 2000, this list suspiciously included Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya. So in essence, it is the central banks that control our economy and the central and commercial banking system together that control all of our money. The difference is, central banks can create money at will, while commercial banks need loans to create money.
So my point is here, the conspiracy theory mindset and her attachment to some really wild and crazy conspiracy theories that are quite common among raw fruitarians. I mean, note also her hostility to vaccines, what have you, her overall blaming of everything in the world, everything wrong in the world. She already has the mentality of blaming on the mass media and the government conspiring together. So this next step of her blaming the bankers and what she repeatedly indicates to be just a few families who are behind the banking system. Not entirely surprising. However, that argument, whenever you hear it on the internet, for example, from vegan John Rose, it's always anti-Semitic. What she's doing is playing a game of asking the audience to fill in the blanks, where she tells you, Google around, you'll figure out who I'm talking about. You'll figure out who the few families are who throughout the whole history of Europe have controlled the banks, who set up this whole system that she believes is some kind of conspiracy to impoverish people and make them chase debt and so-called fictional money their whole life. She says all this stuff. She uses all of the key terms that, again, either have to come from right-wing libertarian nutcases or, frankly, neo-Nazis. Nobody else engages in this discourse.
Research and educate yourself. Who's behind the curtain with these big banks?
And she then says, you go ahead and Google it. Don't trust the mainstream media. Don't trust mainstream social media. You Google around and figure out who it is she's talking about. Again, a neo-Nazi like John Rose plays exactly the same game.
That sick group of people, the powers that be, who control the media. It's obvious. Governments lie. The official version can't be trusted. History books are bunk. Bunk.
History books are bunk.
Freelee the Banana Girl's theory is voiced on the internet by many crackpots, and not all of them are racist. But people, even with the best of intentions, become part of one of these internet conspiracy subcultures without even realizing that's what they're doing. They start to regard really extreme and easily falsifiable claims, for example, from anti-vaxxers, people who are against vaccines. They start to regard those as scientific truth, and then when they're confronted with real scientific facts, they dismiss that as being a product of the media being controlled by a conspiracy, right? That's how anti-vaxxers think. Well, something similar happened with Freelee the Banana Girl, who convinced herself about a whole lot of really extreme and wacky health claims. And then whenever she saw scientific facts or reports in newspapers that contradicted those health claims, oh, well, the contradictory evidence is produced by a conspiracy that's trying to keep us down. It's not surprising she took another step into madness, understanding economics and politics in terms of this vast conspiracy that is at all times trying to suppress her view of the world. In conclusion, if you were to ask me straight up, is Freelee anti-Semitic? My answer is yes.